So, if the most recent Xenoblade release is like 85% a game that's been out for 8 years at the minimum, how am I supposed to milk it for content? Well, why don't I just come up with a bunch of different ways to talk about how Xenoblade Definitive Edition is going to affect the future of the series, because this isn't so much just a Switch version of the original Xenoblade with some added content. It's also basically a 10th anniversary game for the entire series. Less than 2 weeks after the worldwide release of DE was the 10th anniversary of the original Wii game's release in Japan, and with that came the 10th anniversary artwork, which I've already analyzed a fair bit in a previous video. This is now going to talk about spoilers for the entire Xenoblade series, because, well, everything about the whole 10th anniversary thing, and everything talked about regarding Future Connected and the release of DE as a whole is pointing to the fact that, oh no, there's absolutely going to be a future for this series. I think that was pretty guaranteed the instant Xenoblade 2 started selling a lot better than expected, but if they're saying, yeah, we know we're getting more, while they're releasing a game, which includes new story content, I mean, you gotta assume that there's going to be a brand new game at some point. Do I expect us to find out about it in 2020? I mean, probably not. I don't expect we would have found out about it in 2020 even if there wasn't a pandemic throwing a wrench in everything. I just don't think that's their main focus right now, because they're supposed to be working on a Zelda game, by the way. I don't know about that. I'm recording this June 24th. We have not gotten Nintendo's This Is the Stuff That Would Have Been at E3 Direct yet, so we know nothing about Zelda. I wouldn't be surprised if that's been delayed. But the point is, we're going to have a lot of time to speculate about what's coming next, most likely, and I do actually have quite a few ideas. The first thing is, we are probably not done with the Xenoblade 1 world and possibly even the cast as we know them. And that largely has to do with the fact that Future Connected was billed as hinting at the future of the Xenoblade franchise, and a little bit of foreshadowing made in that. And that's just the fact that there's one quiet moment where Melia is talking about the Fog King, and it's not a vision, obviously, because those don't exist anymore, but she says that she thinks it bodes ill. She's basically got a premonition of it destroying everything, and that's a bit ominous and stuff, and there's all that stuff. But then there's the idea that Shulk refers to the Fog King as a new threat for a new world, and that it may be an anomaly because of the new world being in its infancy. Well, who's to say that that was the only Fog King? Sure, there was one creature making one rift, and it's kind of hard to tell if it was actually destroyed in the final battle or if it was just pushed back into the rift with the help of the Telethia. Especially because they still couldn't completely destroy it, really. It was troubling them even after you beat the second phase. Sure, they were able to damage it and stun it, but it seems that power-wise they weren't able to completely overcome it. So, that leads me to believe that if we return to this world in the future, at least for the time being, the big existential threat is going to be the Fog King, or I'm going to call them Fog Masters, because they infect monsters that live and are actually native to the world to create the Fog Beast, so there needs to be basically a species name for Fog King-like stuff, because I fully expect, if we revisit that world, that they're going to follow up on the whole Fog Creature plotline, and that's going to be the existential threat, at least at the beginning, while the more character-based threat is just people learning to work together and establish a new, better world order in the new world Shulk created, as well as probably exploring the rest of this new planet, possibly running into the Xenoblade 2 cast, I can only hope, and some other stuff that I really, really hope happens, even though I don't think it actually will. So there's that, but there's also the idea that the focal character or the protagonist of the next game in the series might be someone completely new to us, even if it revisits an old world. And that's, again, based on the 10th anniversary art, which we're going to talk about another big thing with later. Namely, the fact of the way it's framed. It's set in this dreamscape place that is within the Monolith logo animation thing at the end of their games now, so sure, that's a nice Easter egg for the company, but I don't know if it really means anything specific for the games. Sure, when Monolith Soft was founded, the Monolith referred to the Zohar from Xenosaga, not Xenoblade at the time, but it's still a big deal. So, that part of the logo animation is significant, but I don't know, this might just be a cool set piece. But then you've got a bunch of other party members or supporting characters from all three main Xenoblade games. Most of them are staring out in the distance, Fiora's looking back at Shulk. And then you've got the three main protagonists, and they're looking at the viewer. And it's interesting to the point where, oh sure, it looks like Elma is letting her weapons go, and Shulk and Rex are both holding theirs out towards her, so it might look like she's picking them up. Implying, I've even seen people say that maybe the Zohar that was affecting the Xenoblade 1 and 2 stuff is now moving on to the X universe, and that's where X2 is going to pick up. But I also like the idea that this is from the perspective of a different character. It's not them looking at the viewer, it's them looking at the next Xenoblade protagonist who's walking up with their party members behind them to join the group. This is quite obviously total speculation, so take that whole part with a grain of salt, but there is another really cool Easter egg with the 10th anniversary art, and it's something I sort of alluded to in the previous video, but there's a bit more that I only noticed a little bit later on, and that is the Zohar in the background. The general assumption is that it's referring to the conduit that affected a lot of things over the course of both Xenoblades 1 and 2, and not like the Lifehold pieces from X, and yeah, that makes perfect sense. But then there's the fact that it's shaped like the Xenosaga Zohar, and not like the conduit. If you compare the two, the conduit, the crosspiece is very different from the way it looks on the Xenosaga Zohar and the way it looks here. So that's already pretty interesting. But again, this was drawn by an artist who did a lot of work on the Xenosaga series, and while he did do some character designs for Xenoblade 2, did not actually design the conduit, so he might just be making what he's used to. But then there's the fact that there's the beanstalk with the orbital ring and the first little orbit station there, but you got the FLOS is basically marking out a point on the conduit in blue. And if you go to the Xenosaga Zohar and look at it in detail, and not just in silhouette, it's got a blue fixture or whatever in basically the exact same place. So there's some strong Xenosaga imagery in this Xenoblade thing. Add that to the fact that the most prominent character in Xenosaga, who has crossed over with Xenoblade before, but is now making an appearance in an actual Xenoblade game and not just a massive crossover of a bunch of franchises, and the fact that there's some subtle lore in the Xenoblade 2 art book around her, and the fact that any big Saga fan who played through Future Connected would probably be able to notice how obviously the Fog King was modeled off of the Gnosis from Xenosaga, one of the main enemy forces. I think it's safe to say they're gearing up for a lot more Saga influence in the next full Xenoblade game. Again, Xenoblade 2, I've said this before, is a spiritual retelling of Xenogears. And while X had some Saga elements, and 2 obviously had a few references, and I mean, Fiora has been bootleg Cosmos with her own bootleg X-Buster for 10 years now, we got the real Cosmos with the real X-Buster in Xenoblade 2. We got basically a Gnosis in Future Connected. We got something that had to have been intentionally made to look like the Xenosaga Zohar in a 10th anniversary Xenoblade art. We got Xion and Cosmos hanging out with characters from all the Xenoblade games in the Monolith anniversary art. There's something big and something Xenosaga related coming. Now, what does this actually mean? Xenosaga influence can take a lot of things. Does it mean strictly Christianity-based religious references? Get rid of a bit of the Gnosticism, going back to psychology themes? Are we getting another game with a subtitle of a Nietzsche something? I don't know. But my guess would be that they're gonna go back to sci-fi. Now, the easy thing to say would be, okay, they're making Xenoblade X2 next. Elma might be important in it, but it could follow a new character or something. But the thing is, while X on the surface seems more Saga than any of the other Blade games, that only really holds true from a strictly genre sense. Yeah, Xenogears had a lot more fantasy elements than Xenosaga did, and so did the two numbered Blade games, but the only real direct similarity between X and Saga that isn't just general Xenoseries fare is the full sci-fi setting, because, well, Xenosaga is the most linear and railroady element of the entire franchise, and Xenoblade X is by far the most open-ended and open-world game in it. They are polar opposites, and while the main story of X might take the same amount of time as finishing the entire Xenosaga series, if you use a guide for episode 2, and please do, it's terrible without, there's still a bunch of other stuff, including world building, character exploration, and more lore that takes far longer than that and is far bigger than the actual main story. So I feel like calling X the Xenosaga of Xenoblade is kind of missing the point of what X was actually trying to be from a gameplay perspective, even if story-wise you could argue. So, X2 is possible. A new Xenoblade game, possibly now using the Zohar that has since left the Xenoblade 2 world, that could be a thing. But I've talked about this before, and it's possible. Possible from a developer sense, because Bandai Namco seems to be on much better terms with Monolith Soft regarding previous Xeno IPs than Square Enix is. Even though, I will say, Square Enix did let them use Tetsuya Nomura for some character designs, but Tetsuya Nomura doing some character designs is a bit different than letting them use the Xenogears IP for something, which Bandai Namco has let Monolith touch Xenosaga stuff multiple times since they split off. So I think it might be possible that we may get some sort of Xenosaga continuation in the form of a future Xenoblade title. This does not at all have to take the form of Xenosaga Episode 4 or just the main cast of Xenosaga in some way showing up in a Xenoblade game, but they could easily do some subtle lore stuff to not even imply what happens after the end of that series, but sort of do a wink wink nudge nudge. Because Xenosaga, in its supplemental material, has expressly confirmed that it takes place in a multiverse. And it's very recently been confirmed that when you come to Xenoblade, all of those games take place in the same multiverse. And apparently, this has been intentional since X. So honestly, it's not very hard to do something, even with a throwaway line, to softly confirm, even by skirting the copyright, that these two multiverses are in fact one and the same, and that the upper domain the Xenosaga Zohar draws its power from, and the mysterious source of the conduit's power are in fact the same higher dimensional universe, with the same race of higher dimensional existences that are observing those below in many of the myriad lower domains, each of which is a separate Xeno universe. As for Xenosaga elements other than just the genre, pilotable mechs is a big one, although that could be handled in an X2 that takes no more than that from Saga, and well, that was in Gears anyway. I don't know if Nintendo would let them get away with straight up having Jesus on screen again, but some more elements directly deriving and connecting to real world religion instead of just making allusions to it or having things parallel it, that would be interesting. They could very easily bring back the concept of the anima relics, as in Gears, / the vessels of anima, as in Saga, being a thing that powers up your mechs. And now we get into the really crackpot thing that, while I like talking about it and I like imagining scenarios that would result from it, I don't think it's actually going to happen as much as I wish it would. And that would be literally having Xenosaga characters show up in a Xenoblade world. I'm gonna get into Xenosaga spoilers, but before that, one last thing for the Blade spoiler only people, and that is, I would not be surprised if the next Xenoblade game stars a new cast primarily, or at least has a new protagonist, but then at some point has them run into Xenoblade 1 characters specifically. Because Future Connected is hinting at the future of the series through Xenoblade 1 characters in that world, which heavily leads me to believe that that world is not done yet. And then there's the whole, what if there's a new protagonist thing? Well, remember that part where Alva said that the new world is boundless and eventually they will meet other people living there? Just make the main character one of the other people living there and have them run into New Earth or whatever the planet is and just meet Shulk. It's not actually that difficult or that complex, and I wouldn't be surprised if they pull this is connected to Xenoblade 1 after all thing a second time. Like, they did that with 2, and that was amazing, but I could see them in Xenoblade 3 doing that again, but still hide it in trailers, of course. They hid Mimiosomes in trailers for X even, and they spoiled like the ending cutscene in 1. But have that reveal come a lot sooner, so even if they're not playable, you can still have old characters interact with the plot. So my guess for the next game, barring all Saga stuff, would be a direct sequel to X. I would love that. A Xenoblade 3 that directly ties into 1 after the end of Future Connected somehow. I'd be fine with that. But now we have to jump into the Xenosaga spoilers again, because I just want to believe that we're gonna get something about this. Future Connected has rifts seemingly between dimensions that have Gnosis coming out of them. Even if the whole Infernal Guldo model being used actually ties the Fog King from Future Connected back to 2, that doesn't mean that you can't have souls from other universes also come through different rifts. And if the rifts are showing up because the universe is still unstable from Shulk doing his thing, then all the better. That just means that the more stuff you use the Zohar for, the more chance you have of accidentally crossing stuff over into another universe. And I don't know, but remember the end of Xenosaga and how the Zohar was kind of used a lot there? And then remember how at the end of Xenosaga, Cosmos is drifting towards an Earth-like planet. We don't know if that's Lost Jerusalem in the Xenosaga universe. We don't know if that's Earth in any universe. I don't think Elma is Cosmos, because that wouldn't make very much sense. And just, by the way, people have thrown out that X and Xenosaga take place in the same universe, and that does not work for a lot of reasons. Namely, humans are the only intelligent life in the universe in Xenosaga. There are no non-human aliens. It's humans and humans alone that have just colonized the entire galaxy, and the only other life that didn't originate from Earth, or was designed by humans, created like the Realians, is the Gnosis. So the thing is, oh, we finally found out we're not alone, but it seems that the only other thing out there is trying to destroy us, and then it turns out that Gnosis are in fact human consciousness after all, and the fact that they're only human consciousness kind of implies that humans are the only intelligent life in this universe, whereas X has tons of different alien races. Basically, what I'm hoping against hope they'll retcon into having happened is, in 2 different universes, or 3 really, the ends of Xenosaga 3, Xenoblade 1, and Xenoblade 2 are all happening concurrently, and because the Zohars in the Xenoblade 2 and Xenosaga universes are doing big things, those worlds got intrinsically connected in some way, and depending on how 1 and 2 end up, whether they're separate or connected, then 1, if it's a third thing, also got tangled up in there. If you make that leap, and that's a pretty easy retcon to make because of the ambiguity of where everyone actually is in the end of Xenosaga, it is cleared up a bit. It's implied that Wilhelm, even though his physical body is gone, his consciousness is still there. He's like a universal constant, basically, and he used a bit of his power to help the Elsa escape, and then get it and the Damarung into the Milky Way, so have a chance of getting to Earth at some point. Just make them have also gone to a different universe. Make Chaos almost screwing up with the Zohar thing at the end of Saga have caused some gnosis, some consciousnesses to slip out of this imaginary number domain and into one of a different world, or he had to vent the energy somehow and accidentally let a gnosis through into a different dimension, or maybe the conduit being gone allowed the souls of people who were destroyed in Klaus's experiment, like the ones who were killed and not flung into other universes like Klaus and Kalea were, have their souls still remain and them still resent their deaths in some way, and them rejecting oblivion caused them to transform into Gnosis and find their way back to the Xenoblade 1 universe, where they just wreak havoc because that's kind of what Gnosis do, really. Or even simpler, in Xenosaga, Gnosis are tied to the fact that that universe possesses a collective unconscious, and Gnosis are created when someone after death refuses to have themselves assimilated into the collective unconscious, and that just kind of causes them to transform into a Gnosis. So if the Infernal Guldo model being used connects the Fog King specifically to scientists on the low orbit station or in the city of Moritha that were destroyed with the whole conduit thing, and then Shulk rewrote the universe on top of that, seemingly bringing anyone who is alive over into the new one, as it always was. What about people who were already dead in the previous universe? Did Shulk and Alvis inadvertently not give their souls, their consciousnesses, a place to go, and that caused them to transform into Gnosis? That's a little scary. There's already, I brought this up in my Future Connected video, the idea that we might have jumped the gun with putting Telethi and High Entia out of their misery. There might be a way to turn them back, and that means that we definitely killed some people who did not need to die. What if that was on a much larger scale and affected anyone who had died and hadn't had their consciousness reborn in the entire Xenoblade 1 universe, or people who had died from the conduit incident? That's a little scary, and that would provide a large amount of angst for characters and fodder for enemies in another game that takes a lot of Xenosaga elements, but still takes place in the world of 1 and or 2. So that's something. But then just, what if Cosmos lands on the planet of one of the Xenoblade games? That is the idea that I can't get out of my mind. We know now that Shulk has invented the Hilbert effect, basically. And he's already an experienced weapons developer like Xion. He could rebuild her into something. And, again, X-Buster, Monado Buster, if that's not cool to you, you're wrong. I just kind of want to see that just in terms of how generally awesome that would be, but also the idea of Xenoblade 3 is actually the story of the Xenoblade 1 and maybe 2 casts trying to get a Xenosaga character home back to her own universe. And, I mean, Cosmos ends Xenosaga going to sleep. And while I'm sure it would be said as a nice callback and Easter egg in whatever universe she ends up in, we really just need Xion to be the one to wish her good morning one more time. And I think I've mentioned it before, but the 3 words out of basically anything the entire Xeno series could do in the future that would completely destroy me would be, after probably the end of the game, this could be the post-credit scene of an entire game based around Xenoblade characters trying to figure out how to access other universes without a Zohar handy in order to try and bring Cosmos home. I just need, for that closure, Xion hugging Cosmos again and just saying, "Welcome home, Cosmos." That would destroy me, and as far-fetched as it is, there's honestly a non-zero chance that it would happen with the hints towards the future of the series that we've been getting in Xenoblade as of late. I might have hyped you up unnecessarily, like a lot of people, including myself, did for Future Connected itself, but if Future Connected was supposed to hint at stuff, it hinted at a lot of interesting things. And until next time, this is Luxin, signing off.